Good evening. My name is Rujeko Hockley, and I'm the Arnhold Associate Curator at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Thank you for joining us tonight for this really incredibly special program starring Julie Mehretu, painter extraordinaire, whose show is on view upstairs at the Whitney for just a few more days through August 8th, which is this Sunday. I'm the co-curator of that exhibition along with Christine Y. Kim, and we are joined tonight by Chef Marcus Samuelsson, a dear friend of Julie's, someone who has been in dialogue with her for almost 2 decades. I've had the great pleasure of working with Julie very closely throughout this exhibition over the last 4 years plus in some ways, but we opened here in March. And it's really wonderful to have this as our final program for what's been a really rich and exciting several months. Julie was born in Addis Ababa in 1970 and has been in the US since the late 1970s, East Lansing for her childhood, and then New York since the late 90s. Also born in Ethiopia and now New York-based, Harlem specifically, as is Julie, based in Harlem. Chef Marcus has been a dear friend, as I mentioned, and is an acclaimed chef worldwide. Both of them are really invested in thinking about Black cuisine, Black culinary traditions, agriculture, food growing ways, and we're really excited to put all of this together and think about where food, art, and culture intersect. Tonight, we're going to learn more about these two interesting, exciting humans and their shared interests, and we're going to make a recipe. We're going to make a meal together. So thank you so much for being here, Chef Marcus.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here at beautiful Whitney Museum. Thank you for having me, Julie. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And thank you for being here, Julie, and being the inspiration for this incredible array of delicious ingredients that are going to come together to make a beautiful meal that was inspired by you. And I wanted to say before we go on, we're sitting here in front of a detail from your incredible work mural from 2009. I'm very happy to be able to bring some of your artwork into this moment. So can you tell us about what you're making and what your inspiration was behind this recipe?
Yeah, I mean, have the privilege to be a friend and watch Julia just grow Julie is a force. She's just amazing, whether it's having her as a neighbor and watch her 2 beautiful kids run on the street, or thinking about Black excellence. And it's weird when you have one of your closest friends that is a legend already. That's actually a very interesting way of thinking about it, but she is that. And it's just been wonderful to be in New York, living in this moment and watching her grow and continue to build her art. And so I was just thinking about all of that. And then the dish is really a love letter to her. And it has this balance between Ethiopia / New American, where I think it's like true immigrants. It's 80-20. It's 80% Ethiopian and 20% the new stuff. So we made these gnocchis, beautiful little noodles with teff, which is the oldest grain in the world.
Yeah.
And that's very dear to us in East Africa, in Ethiopia, and Eritrea,
indigenous, right?
Indigenous, exactly. Yep. And then we're gonna make this broth, seafood broth, we made with seaweed, lemongrass, a little bit of berbere. Like there is no Ethiopian meal without berbere.
It's beautiful.
Spice blend, smell that.
Okay, thank you.
This is like what every Ethiopian
delicious.
Household, if you move in, assimilate, right? You move into a neighborhood where there's not Ethiopians. This is why you open the windows and say, "Oh, our house is not smelly." Every Ethiopian house is smelly of berbere.
That's a great smell.
I was thinking about them coming to Michigan, bringing this ingredient to Michigan, and how they had to like air the windows sometimes. And then,
hide the clothes when you cook.
And searching for the ingredients, which, Michigan in the 1970s versus New York in the 2020s.
You could not find teff
in
this
exactly.
country. And then it was something that people, like actually close colleagues of my parents, friends of theirs, grew in Oklahoma. But you did not have teff in Michigan.
That's amazing.
Or in the United States.
I love it, in Oklahoma.
Yeah, they grew it in Oklahoma.
That's so
what
interesting.
spice?
Ethiopian immigrants.
Yeah. And so I remember making in Jeddah when we were kids, we had to make each of us a pile of 50, and they would have big celebrations, but it was always with like this kind of Americanized version of...
A hybrid.
Hybrid version of...
So I'm just going to cook away. And,
okay. And what are you cooking?
So we have to have some collard, some
Yep.
collard greens, which is something that you find both in Ethiopia and, of course, it's very close to us as African Americans, as Americans. So it's just dialogue back and forth.
Just when did you
ahead.
start really working with Ethiopian spices and Ethiopian food? When did you really first start to know Ethiopian food? When you were older? Because it had to have been, it's part of
Yeah.
your core, but like the tastes were familiar. But you came up in Europe and cooking in European kitchens, and then there became this kind of deeper, really deep engagement with Ethiopia.
Well, I think I always thought about my craft as kind of 3 stages. Where the first stage was really learning from my grandmother and learning from my parents.
Right, right.
And if the end goal was stage 3, where I knew it had to be great food inspired by Africa, but I knew I had to kind of do that thirdly. The second act was about understanding the craft of French cooking, right? And as Black people, we always have to disguise. We always have to learn things a little bit differently. But I never forgot about the third act, right? Which,
Yeah.
so you have to learn the classicals. And for me, that was going to Japan first, going to France, going to Switzerland, but never forgetting like, okay, we're going over here. We're going over here, right?
Well,
And
you
then-
couldn't, and it's embedded in you. It's this core part of you, but you're raised in Europe. We're raised as art students in the United States or in any Western context. You're
Yeah.
raised learning a really strict European art history.
The canon.
The canon
Yeah.
in that sense, and which is really shifting now. And I think
Absolutely.
it's shifted a lot
Thanks
in
to
art.
people like you, let's just say.
Well, and I just wanted to talk about that a little bit in terms of like food, because you see that shift. I know you've been a huge pioneer of that shift, but this kind of real effort at transformation when you've had Black folks in kitchens for decades, for
Absolutely. Centuries.
But now we're seeing examples like you with like being Black chefs, Black cooks at the forefront of kind of like pushing what this culture is, what this language is, what this knowledge is.
Yeah. You know, what the beautiful thing, the blessings about being Black in Europe or anywhere is that you're being told constantly your shit doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah.
At all. So that's a blessing because it gives you clear focus. Right? There was never a doubt that no one wanted to hear about my African upbringing or my African food, or there was never a question that somebody's like, what do you do in Ethiopia? Is there a better solution? That wasn't at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so maybe somebody that was really avant-garde brought in some spices from Morocco every now and then, but that was French.
Yeah.
Or maybe someone has
Or
been...
informed by France. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right? So for me, it just gave me clearance. Like, it gave me clarity, right?
Right.
And I felt like it was a hidden treasure that, knock, knock, whenever we graduate, we have this hidden treasure. And when the French graduated, they were still French chefs. So I feel like I've learned everything, but I still had another level to it.
Something in reserve.
Yes.
So then Ethiopia and African cuisine came into is where you kind of started to focus before you started to, because I feel like there's two very, very different explorations. One was on the African continent, and then one was that immigrant community. Then there was the like kind of historic African American influence on the evolution of American cuisine, and then there was the aspect of
Yeah, it's a little bit of, I don't...
the international immigrant community here, and focusing on that, like no passport required and that kind of work.
The beautiful thing about New York is that you're allowed to be more than one thing.
Yeah,
we all
absolutely.
are multi. We all are.
Totally.
And I feel like as an adopted person, as an immigrant, you have multi dualities, right? As an immigrant, I can relate to any immigrant. I can relate to Wolfgang Puck, being an Austrian immigrant, but I can also relate to Puerto Rican that is just making it in New York City, right?
Right.
But then also, Blackness is also multi and layered, right? And that's something that we talk about and constantly think about in the art world and the food world.
Yeah.
And that needs to be explored. So again, none of these isms are negative to me. They're actually, in a weird way, just drives you in a way like there's more to explore. And so much of the great food in America today, there's 4 major cuisines in America that all goes back to Black cooking, right? There's Low Country in the Carolinas.
Yeah.
Right.
There's barbecue, of course.
Yep.
there's Southern and Creole out of New Orleans, right? Those are all from basically slave trade
Yeah.
and what it's ultimately an American food, right?
And all from the Southeast.
Yes, you go
Yeah.
into any book
Yeah.
store, African American food is treated like foreign.
Yeah.
Like not even foreign, not even Italian, not even French, not even Chinese. It's tiny
Yeah.
when it should be. We figure out how to celebrate regions in Italy before we figure out how to celebrate Charleston, Memphis, New Orleans,
Yeah.
for example.
Absolutely. When did you, Marcus, start to feel comfortable in terms of your own trajectory, really overtly incorporating the African influences in terms of the cuisine, the recipes, how you talked about your work? When did you start to feel like I'm on that third stage that you mentioned?
I think you got to claim
On
it.
a public platform.
I think
because
you
you
have
were
to-
always there for yourself.
Yeah, I think you have to claim it. And I had the luxury to come from a very cushy country from Sweden. So to do it through the Swedish lens, it's easier to talk about green space. It's easier to talk about it from, and so that was easier for me than maybe talk about it from an Ethiopian point of view.
Yeah.
So I felt like enter that, and once I had an audience, boom, switch. And part of the switch
Yeah.
is moving to Harlem and creating this narrative.
I was about to say Harlem feels really important for both of you.
Okay, so what do you have going on? We got the greens, we got the
Yeah, we
Gourmet?
got a little bit of a gourmet or collard greens, right?
collard greens.
And then we're gonna throw in a little bit of berbere, just a little bit of hint of this layered berbere.
Okay.
And then I got some pickled garlic and pickled ginger. You know, smell that.
Oh, it smells
Right?
so good. And you put a little bit of honey in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just in mar that come from, you know.
Ethiopia.
And not only Ethiopia, but it's also part of the northern region where you
Yeah.
have amazing honey in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
So it's important to do that.
Eritrea.
I'm gonna make a little broth, a little seafood broth. We have seaweed in here that I just took out actually. A little bit of white wine, lemongrass,
And what did you just put in there?
clams,
Clams.
to make it even more,
Delicious.
delicious and salty. And you know what? When I walked up on the block, I just looked at this incredible wall. It's such a showstopper. Are you happy with it?
Yeah, I mean, when I see it from a distance, I think I would never have even imagined to do something like this. This is really, these are the kind of opportunities that can come across from moments like this, and
Yeah.
I think they become really instructive. And I think that this show has given so much to me to think about, just in terms of the trajectory of my work and
Yeah.
the history of that work and how it's been received, both in terms of its criticism and its
Who
positive.
criticized you?
Well,
I want to know that person.
Not criticism as a negative.
Yeah,
just,
okay.
just
I'm talking
the
about, but
discourse.
like the history of there's
Yeah.
a discourse, and to be honest,
'Cause exactly.
anyone who's pushing against the history of a particular narrative, especially if we're kind of trying to challenge kind of Eurocentric idea
Yeah.
of the canon in terms of what abstraction can be, and abstraction is this space that's been really occupied for the most part by very particular types of practitioners within the art, the center part of the art world as we think of it. And many, not to say that many black artists haven't been working, and African artists and artists from other places haven't been working in abstraction for decades and for
millennia,
centuries,
yeah.
yes. But that you have that there's been this form of privileging a very particular kind of narrative and history, and this is something that you kind of relates to what you're talking about with food.
Absolutely.
And so, but it's an interesting space to actually, it's, I think, one of the most potent spaces in creative work to be able to challenge who one is, how one can articulate and move forward the kind of knowledge of that's created and offered in visual arts.
Yeah.
And how that can be understood from actually these different places and people who've been working with this information for a very long time, pre-colonially, like that this is a form of knowledge building within abstraction and a form of world making.
Absolutely.
And as Nelson said, world breaking. As
Yep.
Nelson said. But to me, so what I'm trying to say is that in that big picture, all of that space that this kind of an institution provides one is this other form of a platform to investigate something else, and then to open up new possibilities of space for Black artists, for African artists, for artists of the diaspora, and artists from other countries. And I think, to me, that's kind of what this piece also offers, is a different way to think about making, think about experiencing, and kind of offer a different challenge to me. So to me, I see it as like,
for your own practice.
Here, try, what you going to do with this?
Yeah.
What can you do with this? And so it's a challenge. To me, I feel like, how do I
well, and this is a detail from itself, a very large and really important painting in your overall trajectory, mural, which is downtown here in New York. And so it's kind of interesting.
Well, there's two versions of mural in this exhibition. There's Tacita Dean's film, which is a portrait, and called Gargada, which means wall and heart. And then there's mural downtown. And so mural is in Gargada here. That's how GDGA, as she calls it, is in the show. And that's the way we were able to bring the biggest painting I made in the show at the smallest scale. I think it's like an 8-inch screen or something.
And it's amazing.
I caught a moment this year when your show came up. David's piece is 100 yards away from me or something like that?
Yeah.
It's right there now.
And our dear friend Sanford at Rockefeller Center.
Yeah.
Right? That was as emotional to me and as big moment for me. I was like, now we're really making changes. Right?
And Daoud Bey has an exhibition
it's on the 8th floor.
And Dave McKenzie
on
has
the 3rd floor.
Here. So and that was something that was one of the, you have these COVID casualties and you have these kind of pandemic silver linings.
Absolutely.
I hate thinking of in that way because it's such a horrific thing that's happened, but still, you've had these kind of casualties that happen because of it, and we've had to postpone the show, and so it lined up.
The calendar synced up.
With all these other works at the same time, including Sanford's, which is kind of,
which is really special. I mean,
it's super interesting too, right after the rebellion last summer, an uprising.
It is.
Because it wasn't intended as a response to that, but it is here, which is, just a thing that, it's a serendipitous thing that happened in this way. And I don't know, I find that something also.
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what Marcus was saying, where this has always been embedded within the work. Like, as in thinking about your practice from the very beginning, you've always been thinking about uprising. You've always been thinking about social movements. You've always been thinking about this third stage where you're going to bring all that you are into these spaces which have kind of only allowed, quote unquote, certain amounts of us in the past, or certain parts of us in the past.
Certain parts of us.
Yeah.
But it's also when Julie's work goes up, as Ethiopians, we travel with her, right? People,
of course,
they're not supposed to take selfies at a museum, but people.
You're allowed to take selfies at the Whitney.
When
with
you look
no
at
flash.
The posting, and even when I saw Julie's show in LA, like 2 years ago, for example, the audience got younger.
Absolutely.
More national, and as Habeshat of Ethiopia, we get in. Right?
Yeah.
And we're excited.
And LA has a big Ethiopian population.
Totally.
And people were doing that here as well.
Yeah.
And posting, and I was like, yes.
Absolutely.
Because it's almost you can't describe in the word, because as an immigrant sometimes you don't think that spaces are for you. Right? But when Julie's here, it's for all of us. And that's such a big statement,
Absolutely.
Which is, I think, also how people feel about you, Marcus. Like,
Absolutely.
In terms of coming to either, and I think it comes from the renown of having started Aquavit.
I was about, thank you, I was about to say, I remember.
Aquavit being this opening, I remember that was the first studio dinner when we had a team and we actually did a Christmas dinner.
Oh
my
gosh.
Aquavit.
Yeah, no, I remember going to Aquavit during restaurant week.
Yeah.
When I worked at the Studio Museum with my friends, that it was this big deal. First of all, there's that. But also because, we were young, we weren't making that much money, but it was a big deal. We wanted to come, of all the restaurants in New York, we wanted to come to Aquavit because of you. And, we're 21 years old. We don't know we don't know you. We don't know, what do I know about fine dining? Scandinavian diving, nothing and nothing. But
this is the interesting work.
It was delicious.
Is that this kind of learning this expertise. You grew up in Sweden from your family cooking at home. And then you developed this form of like fine dining at the highest level with Swedish cuisine here in this country and at home. And then through that place, after having like proven this thing. You've evolved and tried to change the conversation on blackness.
Yes.
And one of the things that I find most compelling about your work, and that has always been such an inspiration to me, is how much you've embraced historic black chefs in this country that weren't given credit, right? Like, and actually meeting them, traveling to visit them, visiting them in their kitchens, learning about their food, and then actually telling the story and retelling the story of what American cuisine is. And instead of thinking of black food as like this form of black food, this is American food. This is the basis of American cuisine. In the same way, black music is the basis of American music, right? That didn't come from elsewhere.
Popular culture.
Yeah, it's the basis of it. So to me, within that, you've been able to change, and this is what's interesting in an abstraction, where you're able to change something from being representative of somebody to being fundamental to the bigger experience
To everybody.
To everybody, yeah. And I feel like we saw that happen with certain musicians in terms of jazz and the invention of that and emergence of that, and since. But I guess that's something that looks awesome.
Yeah, that
It's gonna be.
that
I
looks
wanted to ask
delicious.
you about that, and can you
We're
talk a
distracted.
little bit more about that,
Absolutely.
and then we can talk about like growing that.
Yeah.
But that side, because I feel like you're very immersed in that, and especially with this new project Rise book, and so
Well, I think that,
like when did you meet those guys, and when did you get comfortable doing that?
I think it goes back actually to Sweden and looking at the luxuries of coming here as a black person is because of the civil rights movement. And they kept on pushing of that. So your tax as a privileged black person, like my uncles, when they got drunk in Sweden, the cops knocked on our door and said, "Hey, can you come and pick up my uncles? Your uncles are drunk in the ditches, whatever." But for them to ever be,
How old were you when that happened?
no, but I was just a kid, right? My father like took the bike out, picked up my uncles, but it was a joke. It was ha ha.
Not a big deal.
Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't the same as what happened to a black uncle here.
Yeah.
My parents didn't go to Vietnam, so I'm coming into a set table as a black person, having the privilege of the laws that changed as an immigrant, and also having the privilege of saying and black culture changed everything in the world.
Yeah.
Right? Every civil rights movement in the world is pegged after the civil rights movement in America. So here we're coming into this country as on a set table, and my parents constantly reminds me of, you have a tax. You can't just slide in there. You really got to do something that is about from your core expertise, right?
Yeah.
But it's got to be a little larger than yourself.
Yeah.
And I think it helps also, like, you came out very young in your craft, really strong. I was 23, 24 years old when I was a chef. So when you're 30 and you're evolving as a man, you know that conversation's got to stay. It's not just about you filling 60 seats for the 1% of the 1%. That's not what you came to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really evolving in that. And eventually when you evolve in that, you understand it better. But it took a while. It took a minute. It took a moment. But Dawood Bey, as we talked about, was very much a person I went to talk to about what did Harlem look like. He's like, here's the book, read it to get back to me.
Did a whole book about it.
Yeah. Lana Turner.
But it's that
Lana
social
Turner.
history. It's the whole
Yes.
social reality. It's that whole. It's like a world building.
Yeah.
And I go back to that because I think that's core to like what we are also super interested in our discourse with Denison Hill. All people from different countries, all coming
What is
from.
Denison Hill?
Yeah.
What is it?
Can you tell us exactly? What is Denison Hill doing?
Denison Hill is a laboratory / artist residency / think tank / collective. Paul
Where?
Pfeiffer. It's located in upstate New York in the Catskills in Sullivan County, and it's something that Paul Pfeiffer, Lawrence Chua, and I started about 16, 17 years ago with a few other
that
people.
long?
Yeah, we've been doing it for a long time, and we've been evolving it really slowly. But three of us have made important work up there at different reasons. Lawrence has written novels, done research, evolved his early research he's been working on now there. Paul Pfeiffer has made pieces there. He projected an enormous piece that was made there. Was the last piece at the World Trade Center subway. What was it called? I'm losing the name of it right now, but it was through. It was one of the last commissions for that site, and it was actually a live feed. It was meant to be a live feed, but it was a real-time feed of chickens from hatching all the way to slaughter. And you'd be commuting through the World Trade Center, and this piece, Orpheus Descending, was projected for your commute every day. So you were immersed in this, what are these chickens
life
doing?
cycle.
Yeah, this life cycle.
Yeah.
So that was, but it's been this space where basically Lawrence Paul and I studied together with every other artist and thinker and writer and people that we would like to be engaged with and in discourse with and to learn from and to study together with, but also where this land was so rich in giving us one, food and the garden, but also in giving us creative space and refuge, which is so important for artists of color. And so in a way, we wanted to create this. We wanted to kind of leverage that to open that up for many others, and to kind of guard it and think about how can space be developed differently outside of the kind of capitalist ideas of spatial development. Like how can the Catskills evolve that it doesn't just become like the Hamptons?
Yeah.
Like, that's the opposite direction that we want to go. And how do we protect and save spaces for especially people of color to actually get back into the land, to claim that, to be free in that, and to actually be able to like invent and create in that space. And so for Denniston Hill is this. It's a site. It's about 200-acre campus upstate, and we are going to partner with you.
Yes.
To create.
Which I'm super excited about.
Yeah, we have a community garden program, and we have many other Exodus Media Workshop program. But what I think we should talk about would be, and a point I think a place of common ground is your interest in taking these chefs, the many chefs you've mentioned in this project, in the Rise. Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? And then we can like talk about the collaboration.
Well, I mean,
that looks amazing. So you made the glaze.
Yeah, there's berbere, a little bit miso, so that was sort of reflects the time I was in Japan.
Yes.
And then olive oil, and we're just gonna glaze this beautiful fish.
What's this?
Just a little soy to get the umami, build on the umami, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, Julie, like so much of excellence and moving cooking, black cooking from just something that we did to art, I had to look at you guys. I looked at, as a kid, as Jean-Michel, like who is this guy? How can he make it in the art world? But also look at your work with institutions. You are all these talented, incredible people, but you need to work this private, public space.
Right.
And institutions are there along, and in the cooking world, it's like you work yourself to the bone, and then your restaurant may work or may not work, and then you're burnt out, especially for Black people. So I was thinking about how do we create a space that allows chefs of color to both be inspired, but also aspire, but also take time out and be like, how can I go away and think, live on the land, write my thesis, or think about how do I project myself into the space. Right? Think about what's happening right now with the pandemic. It's going to be the biggest reset of our lifetime.
Absolutely.
So as a lot of my Black colleagues, because of the wealth gap, they can't open a restaurant. They can't reinvent themselves, even if they want to, right?
Yeah.
So we want to create a the Rise Residence program. And of course, the first person we called was Julie's like, hey, what did it mean to be an artist of residence 2001 at the Studio Museum? And here 20 years later, we're at the Whitney, right? So there is an aspiration, there's a recognition, there's an institution that embodies that. And then 20 years later, you have this incredible thing. And of course, it's not just Julie, it's like, Sani, Cara, Nicolene, I mean, the whole tribe is just incredible, right? And if we can do half of that, it would be amazing.
Yeah.
In terms of culinary, in the culinary, and part of the commitment of Denniston Hill and deep kind of work that we're trying to do collectively is to partner with people who are immersed and committed to agriculture and land and the evolution of like gardening and farming and the connection with that with creative process but also to kind of reclaim that space as a space of creative work and also of the generative kind of work for communities, for food equity, for as an additional resource for so many people of color who actually don't have that much
Food
access to
insecurity,
food insecure. And so we're very kind of inspired by projects like Soul Fire Farms or People of Color Land Trust, and plan to partner with them to encourage that form of hiring through Denniston Hill, and for the evolution of our garden program with these kind of projects. Linda Goodbrine and Project Eats is another inspiration.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Another Art Worlds,
And so there's always been
crossover.
this side of the land. The garden has been core to who we've been. It's always been about the intersection between agriculture and art and creative process. But what I like to think of them as are as these very deep participants of world building and a sense of collective world building. And that's part of that's what culture is.
Yeah.
And culture, it comes from all these elements. They're not separate from one another. Growing the daif and then grinding it and then mixing it with ibe as a source. Ibe being this very kind of, it's amazing to think of that. Like, it's such a beautiful
What is
combination.
that? Can you tell us?
Ibe is like...
Basically, a ricotta. It's a fresh cheese out of Ethiopia that is an everyday, like when you have a celebration, ibe is at the table.
Yeah.
Like fresh cheese. You take some yogurt or some buttermilk, you bring it to your bowl, you let it sit for a good 20, 25 minutes, you strain it, and that's your fresh cheese, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes people dry in kale and make, put some chives, just put some greenery into it.
You can spice it like you can
Yeah.
ricotta or all that stuff. But
Like
it's this
kind of a
really
mild
fresh
cheese, yeah.
It's a mild fresh cheese, and you can age it, you can flavor it, and it's served as an accompaniment for a lot of different food. But
So-
to use that as a source of
And to make gnocchi out of it,
gnocchi.
with these totally,
and
different ingredients.
Ethiopia and Italy have a very interesting colonial
Of
history
course.
as well, which is kind of
Which,
even just look
when
at
there's a
work
colonial
as
history, there's a
value.
food exchange
To
history.
look at our work as value, as worth, right? Like this is something that mothers are making in Ethiopia every day. They're
Yeah.
making honey that we've used in here. They're making butter, akebe. They're making it every day. And when you grow up in Europe, you think about your food or your craft as eventually a marketplace and a value proposition. When in Africa, you just do, right?
Yeah.
And being at the Whitney as an institution, it's so powerful to look at our work as worth and art at the same time.
Simultaneously.
well, it's again going back to that idea of knowledge. You can't construct these kind of new realities without this kind of space of this form of knowledge. And culture and art is a really deep sense of knowing and knowledge, and architecture is a part of that.
Which
Agriculture
Julie's
is a
also
part
an
of that.
architect, which
Yes.
she's not admitting.
Agriculture is a part of
Yet.
that, and cooking. Like
Yeah.
all of these elements are how culture evolves, including sound, music, dance, all of these creative and cultural aspects that are intertwined with everything else that contributes to how we construct and
your
imagine our
kids.
worlds. And it's the imaginative possibilities of what could be
Yeah.
that I think guide and push us at DH, and I think that's what I've been so inspired by with Marcus. It's not there's a lot of the commercial side of the world that we both have to be attentive to in terms of we live and exist within a liberal capitalist world, but we are built. There's this way of like thinking and growing and evolving community that we've had to do from the beginning.
Oh, that has
all Black
worth
folks.
beyond that.
Yeah. That has been about nurturing and evolving and contributing to the kind of to different type of possible futures and speculative futures, and that's what I wanted to also talk about. Like this meal is a speculative type of future and
But,
possibility.
aren't all meals.
Yeah, so it's it's the coast, which is where you come from.
Yeah. But I think there's
Which terrifies, to be honest, a lot of Ethiopians.
The coast?
Yeah, coastal food.
Oh, coastal
Clams
food.
and shrimp. And
That's interesting.
I think it's
Not
also
everything
powerful
is there.
that Julie brings her kids up. This is the second summer that they're farming with you up there, right?
yeah, they're gardening with us, definitely, definitely.
And they touch the food and they
Oh
feel
yeah,
the food.
they're growing, and last year they each had their own beds, and this last night Haile was with me in the garden harvesting chard, and Kate and Haile both were cooking it with me at the table, and potatoes, and slicing.
Can I ask Julie, speaking of cooking with Haile and Kate, can you talk a little bit about your own kind of culinary exploits, and because I think so much of this is, I'm so interested in thinking about home cooking, as in the cooking we all do at home. It is speculative fiction, sometimes more so than others, when you really don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
But also just the translation from a restaurant chef, a restaurant meal to, we all eat every day. We all have to cook, especially during the pandemic. We've all been cooking, so much more, many of us, than we had previously at home. So I'm just curious, Julie, about, I've heard from you and others that you cook.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, we all had to cook this last year.
We all did, but I've heard you cook before that. So.
Yes, and I love to cook. But really, it also comes from our lifestyle with our children, is one that we are home with them. After school, after work, we want to spend the evening together. We want to sit down and eat together, and we want to cook, and we cook. And part of it is stuff we've learned from Elvira, who's helped raise our children since they were very young. She's from El Salvador, and she's taught us how to make the most incredible black beans and red beans and different forms of rice and roast chicken. And we have Elvira's beans and Elvira's recipes. We have my mother's pasta. We have Jessica's bolognese. She got from her heritage in the Italian neighborhoods in Australia.
In Australia, multiple layers.
Exactly. We have Ethiopian food, which is core to all of us, and we have to eat that every week. We just do. Whether we order it in or whether we make it. Whether it's a simple churro, which is a basic, really simple food dish, to, to heating up food that my mother has made for us and brought from us from home, which she brings in frozen containers. I don't have a Maya making dodo what for us. I'm not at that level yet. But
you are close. You neighbors.
Yes.
We are neighbors. I love that.
You just come on over.
Rooster was pregnant with, and Jessica was pregnant with Kate. He'd bring over, like, this is the mac and cheese we just tried today.
Yes.
This is the mac and cheese we just tried today.
That's exactly what you need.
Yeah, in a bag.
In that moment.
You imagine?
I can't. You can come to my house anytime.
It was extraordinary.
Just having, but there's so many versions of moments with Julie that we all share, but just having her setting up the studio across the street or working on the large pieces in the church just a couple of blocks away from us, that to have someone that is on top of the game in their world working in our village, right? And you walk around, and I thought about it like, this is why I moved to Harlem, right? You think about Maya Angelou and James Baldwin and Jacob Lawrence, and now you think about like Sandy's up the block,
creative
in
community,
the studio, doing it right now. Julie's down the street, doing it. Like pieces are like, you're coming to the studio and it's like 20 people and it's like big and they're climbing and it's like, I'm like, yes, this is that moment, right? And it's also not performative art. It's not like they're in there posting and just pushing this out that this is what we're doing. They're doing it. And for me, that is one of those biggest privileges of being in Harlem, because the brain drain was always like, oh, you're talented, so you need to leave. No, you're talented. So when she brings her work and does the work from there, it changes. And then sometimes towards the end, she invites people in the community in, and there's a buzz in Harlem on Lenox. Like, oh, I was there. I saw it. I caught it. And that's memories forever.
That's what basically Red Rooster is.
Absolutely, I was going to say. It's the crossroads.
Yeah, it really is. And one of my favorite aspects of going into Red Rooster is the bar. And all the different people who sit at that bar, from David Hammonds, in Incognito, sitting at the bar, to like,
up and coming.
All kinds of amazing people you'll just run into there. And the restaurant, and I'm so happy to see it open. It was so sad to me when it was closed. And you would eat outside and walk through this empty restaurant with no sound. And
Yes, it was hard.
how was that, Marcus? You went right away. You went into moving into a different form of caretaking, and I think we also got really immersed in that in terms of rethinking our work at DH. But it became something really important to you. Red Rooster was involved with World Central Kitchen and providing meals to people.
It was very hard because as creative chefs, we're artists and we're very emotional. And the fact that me as a chef, that I couldn't go to this place and contribute the same way, but I quickly had to learn about, okay, I have to contribute in a different way. So it was also very satisfying that we could become this place of serving our community this way, like very different than what we've done before, but equally important, right? Or even more important in many ways. But it was different. And, you know, you're going to meet him tonight, my dear friend Jonathan Waxman, that's just around the corner from here. He told me early, Marcus, you need to call a chef or a friend every day. Just call 2 people, because socially, it's very weird for chefs because we're constantly around people.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, our compadres, you know, what we were doing, our day-to-days, were different.
Right.
And obviously, Jonathan has seen more stuff than me. So he knew, like, emotionally, I wasn't really set to handle that, not meeting customers, not having that.
So he was saying through that time, you need to contact.
Just for yourself.
To stay in contact with people. And we did that.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's, so many things that were amazing started during the pandemic. We started Independent Restaurant Coalition. Why did we need the pandemic to take care of one another, for example, right? There's so many, I'm sure in your world too, there's many things that came out of the pandemic.
That's one of the reasons I think we'll never be going back to this kind of reset. Fundamentally, there is a shift in terms of there is no possible way to move forward into just this kind of neoliberal normal idea. That's not ever coming back. Lawrence said this at the convening the other day. And I think what you're bringing up is a form of kind of caretaking and community nurturing and a form of communitarianism that is so...
Mutual aid.
Mutual aid, exactly. That's the word I was looking for. That is so important to both of our work, but is also so important to the kind of bigger projects we all need to be engaged with in terms of world building. And I do hope that, you know, after the rebellion of last summer and uprisings and after the kind of efforts of reconstruction we see some places going through, that these aren't just small nods towards something, but that really substantial shifts can come out of this. We've seen that happen in government. We've seen that happen in terms of what you just described in the restaurant coalition. What did you call it?
Independent Restaurant Coalition.
Yeah, Independent Restaurant Coalition. And, you know, why did we need like this crisis? But it is through these moments where time and space allows for a different form of form to emerge. And I think that looks so good.
Oh my God, it looks so good.
Jesus, I can't even think of what it is. So tell us more. Tell us about it.
This is Julie's.
Lost our train of thought.
Jesus Christ, I'm ready.
So this is like seared bass glazed with pepper and miso, with clams, and this really sour, salty broth. Like we're taking it right there, just like her art, right? It's taken right there. We drive it to like super sour. So it's gonna hit you right here.
All the flavors.
And that's really what food is when you build, right? We can all taste sweet, salt, sour, bitter, right? We can all taste heat and then umami, and there's tons of umami in this. And
God,
you know, we
so
built this
beautiful.
dish up a little bit, and it's kind of like it's a mobile, it's rocky, it's not this perfect layer, linear thing. It's like all over. It's aggressive.
I love it.
Just like Julie, like this. It's just.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Heat. She's always engaged. She's passionate about it, right? And her,
this is you. This is Marcus, like in a nutshell. Because Marcus, we've been friends for a very long time. When Marcus first saw my work, he invited me to Aquavit for lunch to talk and to learn to get to
Is
know
that
him.
how you
Very
first
connected.
met?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
he was close with Thelma.
Yeah.
And
All roads lead back to
I would say
Thelma.
I'm still close with Thelma.
you're very close
I
with
call her
Thelma.
for support.
That was, it was contemporary, a present
he's
closeness
very
and a
close to
future
Thelma, but we were
closeness.
very close, and we met through that.
Yeah.
Yes.
But what I want to say is the generosity and kind of gregariousness and you know the way you approach community building is in this way. You invited me to your restaurant. It was about a form of hospitality and generosity, and then it doesn't stop. I mean, when you're my neighbor, we realized we were going to be neighbors right after that. And then you moved a little bit further, but you opened up the restaurant in the neighborhood and have included our whole family in that community from the beginning. And the commitment to just understanding our work, but also this way of like engaging and building up and engaging with each other's work. That's like so special. But also what it does is the fact that you even wanted to do this. Like,
of course.
Yeah.
like he was like, you have this thing, let's do something.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so you said thank you at the beginning, but it's really we thank you
Oh no,
for
this is.
this opportunity. A really special way to close the show.
And we're going to be neighbors because our new restaurant that's opening sometimes in spring, next spring, is up the street
Oh, amazing.
on 26th
We will be
Street.
there. Julie, you really will be neighbors.
Oh yeah.
gonna be in
And
the
Julie
building.
knows all about it.
She'll be
because
there every day.
We create. We thought. Yeah, I talked to her about it, and like, what about this? And what about that? And she's
Yeah.
like, let me think about it. And I feel. I mean, as I'm staring at Glenn's piece in the mirror here, right? Like America. Like that's for. that's amazing. Like how the artist community, even before opening Red Rooster, I asked Glenn. I sat down. We have a meeting. We have to talk. And he came down, and all I had to do was just me pouring out what I was thinking. And he was just as patient as Glenn is. He just listened. And he said, you will do all of those things. And, I feel so much gratitude towards the artist community to be able to have Julie as a dear friend, but also this community that constantly pushes us and made us think in a different way in moments like this. I can tell you how important it's been to, have artists out there speak and be loud and be not shy about being controversial and pushing, right? And that's the fire in the belly is like so much what I get from Julie. She's constantly, there's a cost. There's always something we need to think about. There's always something she puts in front of us, whether it's a film from Ethiopia, whether it's an upstate or it's northeast. And that's exactly what we need.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what's the point of being in New York City? The whole point is to push and have a progressive society. And in moments like this, where we all need to think about, okay, how do we re-engineer ourselves? I just think I'm just so grateful, not just for the friendship, but also for the push, the elbow in your face. Yeah. You know what I mean? That makes you think about, oh shit, I gotta wake up, I gotta do something. And that is so
calls
beautiful.
Arms.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it.
Beautiful. Love you and thank you for having me.
So much.
Now let's eat.
Let's
get it. Do we have a knife and fork?
I need a fork.
We have some forks? Because
not.
in Ethiopia we eat with our hands.
Well, I'm ready. You let me know.
So,
I'm
do we have any questions or anything?
We have so many questions, honestly.
Yeah, go straight on.
One person, what kind of salt did you use?
This is great kosher salt.
There you go.
Oh my God.
Oh, thank
the
you.
milk is so good.
With Tef. These are
It's
Julie's.
ridiculous.
These are Julie's gnocchis.
Made in good, babe.
Got some forks and knife.
That's delicious. In the napkins.
Oh, sorry. It's right in front of me.
Julie, there's a question from Sita, your sister-in-law.
Okay.
Oh, sweet.
Yes.
Family, why not?
Family is always watching, always supporting.
That's beautiful.
She says, I've always loved watching you cook. It's the energetic, creative process and always creates a delicious product. How do you both think about the overlap in terms of creativity in painting and in food?
Okay. Well, I'll start with saying that one of my first gifts from Marcus was a painting he made. Do you remember when I first moved into the house?
Yes.
And we still have that in the house. So I remember Marcus used to paint a lot and do collages.
Still do.
You did.
Amazing.
It does.
And is that something you've always done?
Images.
Amazing.
Always has had this other side. And for me, I think cooking is another way of just trying to, again, I think with I grew up working in restaurants. I waited tables. That was my form of income earning. And so what was the creative work? And when the restaurant's slow, you're watching the kitchen. And I learned from every chef that worked in the kitchen and all the cooks that worked in the kitchen. And that's how I learned how to make anything that I learned how to make. So for me, it's always been part of that
so good.
core creative,
The broth is amazing.
The broth
Is it?
has that
Sorry.
I mean, think about, close your eyes and think
delicious.
about Julie, like her work and everything. It's there. It's in the broth. The berber is right there.
It's so good.
The Teft ingredients, the cheese. It's all Ethiopia, but
So are you
also
sharing this
America.
recipe?
No, it's yours. It's you. It's all you.
It's delicious.
You can share it if you want.
But I think the painting side always came because
The creative side.
I find speaking to architects, and they were always wanted to tell me what the design of the space should be. And my heroes were black heroes.
Yeah.
And as great as they were as architects, they didn't know my heroes. So I just found it easier to think about these collages as moments for us.
Yeah.
Right? And whether it was big moments like Muhammad Ali, we shared those, but it's also a lot of moments that was not that big, but that was big for us. Right? So the fact that black people couldn't go to restaurants, for example.
Of course.
I remember
Or museums.
I remember
Or
when we were
museums,
building
yes.
or museums. I remember when we were building the bar at Red Rooster. This architect, poor architect, he's super talented, but he's like, "Oh, I have a bar, and it's gonna be beautiful. It's gonna be this." I said, "The bar needs to be built based on Bevy Smith.
Yes.
It needs to be shaped
Oh my God.
like an uptown, beautiful, gorgeous queen."
I love that.
And he came back, was like, "What?" I said, "No, you don't know my reference point." I'm like, it needs to be voluptuous. It needs to be gorgeous
Lush.
and celebrated and lush, the way Bevy is. So you just find it hard and hard. It's like, stop. I'm just going to draw it down. This is how the bar should look like.
That's so amazing.
So when you notice your reference point, no one hears the reference point, you might as well just do it yourself.
What do you think about, Julie?
Oh, sweet.
How do you think about the overlap?
Well, for me, I feel like there is this like intense cultural. For me, it's like food tastes like and brings up different forms of memory and experience, like cultural experience. And I eat certain foods and I think of different people, different parts of the world. When I go on 116th Street and I go into a Senegalese restaurant, it takes me right back to my time in Dakar.
Yeah.
And the color of the sky when we would have lunch, or the color of the sky at dusk, or whatever it is, whether it's the soundtrack. And to me, cooking food takes me back to my parents' home, takes me back to Michigan where we grew up, and at that moment of dusk. There were certain moments, and I remember many different times working on very big paintings, very big projects, where I can remember by what I drew in certain parts what we ate that day. They were so intertwined in terms of how what was being craved.
In terms of what you were eating in the studio?
Yeah, because I lived in the studio.
Yeah.
So we cooked in the studio. Jessica and I shared a studio and a loft and a place, and all of that kind of came together.
Yeah.
And we still cook in the studio now. We cook in the studio for lunch every day. And I have a great group that loves to put food together. We get collective groceries, and different folks in the studio have prepared different foods, and we have a studio cookbook, as a matter of fact.
Oh, you do?
I should share it with you.
I want to see that.
Yeah. I'll show you. They put it together one year as a gift. It's really beautiful.
I can speak from experience and say that the studio lunches are
they're always
extremely
plant-based.
delicious.
For the most part, plant-based.
It's amazing, and the whole studio. I mean, I think what I love about
to eat together.
I love about that tradition, and something that I was thinking about with Red Rooster. So I started working at the Studio Museum in 2005, and Lenox Lounge closed soon thereafter. And I always think about like Lenox Lounge, this historical space for community, for creative people, for Black creative people, uptown, maybe music focused, but obviously everyone came through. Artists, writers, chefs, I mean, everyone came through. And I think of Red Rooster and the bar, which I love thinking of as inspired by Bev, in a very similar way. The images that you have on the walls, the artwork that you have on the walls, the decor, the kind of lushness, the kind of downstairs space as a music space, as a performance space. But, you know, Julie, this pausing every day for lunch at the studio, it gives me that same feeling that we stop work, we sit together, we make food together, we talk together, whoever's here can come and be a part of it.
Exactly.
You know,
Can I tell you about a moment
it's amazing.
when Obama won, right? 2008. Harlem did two things. There was there was social media, but it wasn't the same level, right? It wasn't organized. People walked to the Apollo, and then they walked to Lenox Lounge. And it was not an announcement that here is where they have. And I walked into those two places, and I was like, what if one day it's that natural, you have a space where people just knew that this is the place to come to, and something is larger than life in our world, right? And that was a moment like Lenox Lounge was just natural. People just walked to the Apollo.
Absolutely.
And then just walked to Lenox Lounge, and even Paris Blues. It was just natural stuff.
Paris Blues.
Right? And I was like, no announcement, there's no sign, there's no one screaming at the door, there's not like the beers are cheaper, none of that stuff. It was just, and I was like, that's being in the community of the community.
That's true.
I always thought
That's
about
the goal.
that. So I was like, we have to be instant vintage, right? And you cannot announce that. You just have to.
And you can't.
No,
You
there's
just
nothing
you can't make it happen.
You
It
can't
just has
make it
to happen.
So that was a big goal, and then I'm glad you brought up Lenox Lounge.
I mean, an amazing, special place.
M&G.
M&G.
Didn't you save the sign?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, so this is like a selfish question, even though someone else asked it. Are there any Ethiopian restaurants that either of you would recommend in New York City? Or, alternatively, any traditional Ethiopian dishes that, I think that I'll speak for myself, I am familiar with maybe the more well-known, but are there any kind of lesser known, or, I love Dorwat, it's amazing. But the restaurant one, as I said, selfish, my question.
I think the Ethiopian community right outside DC, whether you're in Maryland or whether you're in Virginia, there's actually, right behind the FBI building, there's a parking lot, and there is this incredible Ethiopian food market that really comes alive through Uber drivers and cab drivers at night. It's halal, it's kosher, it's delicious, it's beautiful. And that's really where the Ethiopian community really, if you want to taste it, feel it, that's where you stop going just to traditional Ethiopian restaurant. That's where you go to the Kitfo place, the Dorwat place,
That's what they do.
That's what they do. You only go to the
Specialize
Kitfo place.
in a dish.
And that's really beautiful to watch that. And if you really want to see the culture, that's where you see the culture.
Well, I think we're going to ask one more question, then we have to wrap up. Though, of course, honestly, we could keep talking forever.
It's so good, I ate too fast.
It's so good. It's so good. We've talked about so many wonderful topics today. I'm curious, Julie, forever, always, anytime I talk to you, you're like, have you read this book? Have you listened to this music? Have you seen this show, this podcast, this article? Like, completely omnivorous kind of interest in the world. And Marcus, I'm getting a similar feeling from you. And so I'm curious, what are kind of books, documentaries, resources that have shaped the way you think, the way you create, whether kind of over the course of your life and career, or, I think speaking of the pandemic and how much has shifted, maybe something that has really been important to you in this last year and a half, maybe outside of your specific arenas of art, painting, cooking, etc., but the kind of broader culture.
I think Summer of Soul was really big, and it represents so much beauty of this really what Questlove really caught and broadcasted was this, when it happens in Harlem, when it happens around Black people, it's just different. The audience is just as interesting as the act itself. It's not just landing in pop culture. They fly in the gospel choir from Oakland. They have, of course, Nina Simone and Sly and 19-year-old Stevie Wonder. The style is incredible. The music is just incredible. So I thought that was really powerful and moved me. I was very excited about this moment because I know how long and what it means, not only for this institution, but for all of us. This is big. This is like a really big moment that Julie's here.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's one of those moments that you can point at. It's like, she was there during the pandemic, but also bringing traffic that we as Black creatives can be part of bringing order back and traffic back into an institution like the Whitney. That's amazing.
Yeah, and New Yorkers, you know, really for our city, because that's who's really coming, just based on travel restrictions.
Yeah. It was a great opportunity.
And I would say the last thing, I would say that great athletes, just like artists, teaches us a lot. So watching Naomi and watching Simone, and I love the fact that there's young Black women that are teaching the world, again, about how do we think about mental health.
Yeah.
In my industry, we're not there, but we're struggling with mental health.
Yeah.
And to see it on the largest scale, in the Olympics, and what they're doing is so much bigger than just this moment, right? This is gonna, people like 1968, people point at what happened at the stand. People are gonna point at this moment and say, oh, how do I pause at a big moment? I just think it was beautiful though.
Absolutely.
That's a really good point.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I agree about Summer of Soul too. And I think some other films like Steve McQueen's Small Axe films were also super great.
Yes.
And
during the
really
pandemic.
I mean, that especially, they came out earlier and we were upstate and we couldn't stream them. But I was actually here installing at the Whitney.
We were talking about them.
When I watched them.
Beautiful.
And they blew me away.
Yeah, I agree.
I think he's a marvelous artist and filmmaker.
I mean, he made 5 feature-length films somehow.
So those were incredible.
And the argument you can have, which one do you like
most?
Oh
my gosh.
And the back and forth.
I really
Love is Block.
I actually love that one.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't,
It's all perfect work, I think.
Yeah.
It is perfect.
And then I think also what that opened up in terms of music.
Yeah.
It took me back into this whole summer of mine of basically, all of that from lovers rock to dub to all of that kind of getting deep into that this summer. So that's been really great. I went to Jamaica with Adrian.
Yes.
That was cool. And then I think in terms of podcasts, I've been listening to so many because I listen to them a lot when I work. And there's certain ones that I think have really stood out, like Krista Tippett's On Being podcast. I think she has some really phenomenal guests. I think Paul Holdengraber's podcast, the Quarantine Tapes, have been really great through the quarantine and through the pandemic. Marcus has a fantastic podcast where he's interviewed really wonderful people. We were just talking about Questlove.
Yes.
Amir Tom's, that podcast has. And I think, but what I love about podcasts are the kind of intimate conversation that you can be a part of, that you can just witness and listen to. But when you can get really great, Ezra Klein also has a really great podcast that I think is really interesting, very amazing. And the guests, the caliber of guests, and being able to listen to really inquisitive, smart people question and challenge each other and really kind of take each other on with their ideas.
Yeah.
And to witness that and be able to just study through that has been really, really important to me. And I've also had the wonderful opportunity to work with some really great people through this time, like Robin Cross-Lewis and I started a project. Like pandemic created these pauses and these niches where new kinds of work could emerge. Paul Pfeiffer Lawrence and I meet once to twice a week through the entire last year and a half for Denniston Hill. We haven't
Really,
been able to have that kind of sustained conversation.
And space in your calenders.
Exactly.
Frankly.
So that has been a really important, and then the kind of dearest time we've been able to have with our families and our children, and in a way that I would never have had this kind of sustained time with my teenager, or
Is Cade
I
full on
understand.
DJ now, or is he?
He's still in that. He's making.
He's making.
Yeah,
he's
he's making.
making music.
Yeah, making music all the time.
It's
Beautiful.
amazing.
Going on, yeah. So that was,
thank
I
you.
think, yeah.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
We have to wrap up, but unfortunately, because really we could keep going.
Thank you.
This is so delicious, Marcus. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We had fun.
Marcus,
James and I
thank
had
you.
fun.
Yeah.
Making it and going back and forth.
It's
So
really
James is over there. He
good.
just had, bless up to James and his wife that just had a baby.
Oh,
Yes,
beautiful.
yes.
Yeah, big
Congratulations.
So we were excited about this, and just thank you for allowing us to be part of it.
Please. Thank
Marcus,
you.
thank
Come back
you.
anytime.
Thank you so much.
So much.
And thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Enjoy your evenings and make something delicious.